Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme, looking at progressive music. More specifically, this is a progressive metal week, and we can't have anything even vaguely associated with progressive metal without some Between the Buried and Me popping up during the week. So that's what we're going to be checking out today. This might be off of an album that I haven't heard yet or have very little exposure to. This comes off of Coma Ecliptic. We're looking at the track The Coma Machine. Let's dive in, see what Between the Buried and Me is bringing to the table today. So we have a solid 7 right here at the beginning. Right here at the beginning. The drummer's going wild. Interesting chord progressions from the start.
You teach us what it was. 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 Lift our lamps to focus. We soon drift through the night. Lift our lamps to focus. We soon drift through the night. Get away, we drown the cloud of life. Wake, we escape.
The drumwork, man, as always, but yeah. These chords are highly tense as well. I mean, from the very beginning, there's been something a little creepier about them, something eerier. It's really putting it in the spotlight here. The triplet mod there. Also the wild harmonies here.
One last time. No more options to go. A glimpse of faith. Take it Madness embrace the mode. Cannot wait any longer. A string of lights blink, mesmerize my senses.
That's gonna get me every time. It's not just a triplet either, it's the melody coming in from the left guitar.
Lift our lamps to focus. We soon drift through the
Back to this.
night. Lift our lamps to focus. We soon drift through the night. You teach us what it was. You teach us what it was. You teach us
I do like that. That was in the intro too. But we have the center vocal. have the stuff on the sides to follow the sentence up. All that aggression into this very light vocal style. Drumwork, man. Beautifully expressive harmonic palette too. It feels large, almost expansive. Everything else has felt very contained as far as chords, and this one's like, we can go anywhere. Yeah, okay. Oh, jeez. This drummer, man. The guitar tone over here for this section. Texturally, it just fits. I like that synthwave sounds. Makes me curious to see where this song goes. Or I guess to see where the album goes after this track. So, this is interesting because it doesn't really feel like Between the Buried and Me. To me, at least. There's definitely parts of it that are very, very much them, but I know their newer stuff goes into a very prog metal direction, but it also feels distinct from this. It feels more metallic, whereas this feels more rock opera. And their earlier stuff is very much progressive metal core. Has a lot of the core aesthetic to it. This is very pristine work, not really focusing too much on time signature and riffage and rule of cool sounds like they did in their earlier core adjacent stuff and their later metal focused stuff. This, though, has a heavy focus on harmony in a way that I don't see a lot of bands replicating. In fact, while I really don't think this sounds like Haken, that's probably my closest parallel. primarily because of the unusual, sometimes obtuse, and even unwieldy chord progressions and harmonies that are used throughout this song. It reminds me a lot of what Haken has been doing on their latest albums, really pushing the bounds of can we still make it feel like rock or occasionally metal if we interject all of these wild, jazzy, musical theater, barbershop quartet chords into the music, and really trying to bring a lot of this beauty from more traditional styles of music into the realm of metal. It creates, for me, kind of a jarring experience. I think it works fine. It's just so unusual. You don't hear these types of chords in metal very often. And granted, this song doesn't stay in them the same way that Haken likes to. This track in particular kind of bounces between the more expanded harmonic palette and the more metallic one. There are certainly sections in here that feel very metal, but I feel like there's just as many where I'm listening to the chords, I'm listening to the note choices on the lead melody, and I'm thinking, wow, this is unique. This is unusual. You know, my place of reference for this is very distant from metal, and it's cool. I dig it from the experimental perspective, and I'm sure I could get my ear around to hearing it and enjoying it. But as of right now, it's like seeing a cat bark. And I'm pretty sure I said the same thing during when we checked out Haken's Affinity. Is that the album that we checked out? And most of their newer stuff, just in isolated single song reactions too. It's it's unusual. It's not bad. It's just it doesn't immediately grab me for one reason or another. And it could just be the mix of timbre and composition. It could be execution, maybe even. I don't think that there's anything wrong with the composition on this. Everything sounds solid, but maybe need a little bit of rawness in there. Maybe it needs to be scuffed up a little bit, more metallic at times. I don't know. Maybe it is the juxtaposition between the metallic sides and the less metallic sides. For whatever reason, though, this song kind of didn't grab me much at all. I don't really have criticism for it. I think it is a solidly constructed track with really interesting decisions going on in it. The performance of it all is phenomenal. It just kind of bounced off of me, though. Just not my cup of tea at all, which is a shame because on paper it feels like it should be. This should be right up my alley. And it was fine. No complaints, but I really wasn't looking forward to much other than the drums. Dude, I'm not usually this big of a drum guy. Like, I'll sit here and praise bass all day long where it's deserved. I love talking about the bass. The drums in this track are phenomenal, though. I feel like if you asked me to talk about one thing as long as I could, this would be the topic I choose. Because this drummer is just bonkers insane. And it starts off a bit on the lighter side. We do have some crazy fills at the beginning, but the patterns themselves are kind of straightforward. It feels deceptive, though. It only takes about 40 seconds, 50 seconds to get into the song, to the point where the drummer almost feels bored of playing pretty straightforward patterns and begins injecting all sorts of polyrhythms, metric modulations, just switching up the entire feel of the song compared to what everyone else is doing. And that's within the patterns themselves, putting in little flourishes. Flourishes? Putting in little flourishy techniques. that kind of just spice up the drums. It could be a pretty standard beat, except we're also doing this between those standard hits or something like that. Always kind of making it fresh, making it exciting. The drum fills themselves are always interesting. I love it. Just listening to the way that he shifts and morphs the time feel of this song from start to finish. Every single one of these fills feels like it naturally adapts the song into the next idea. I kind of wish they did this more often. There are quite a few sections in here where it's just a very harsh transition from one to the next. I don't think it's a coincidence that in most of those places, the drum didn't do a fill across the ideas. In some ways, I think the drummer is the fluidity in this band, or at least in this song. I don't want to extrapolate that too far, because they have put out some songs that are just super fluid, really smooth transitions. This one, they specifically went out of their way not to do that consistently. But the drummer's just absolute beast and keeps the song flowing. Just really is the glue for this entire thing. But beyond that, it's just a marvel to listen to. Like, this is straight up ear candy. The production on the drums sound fantastic as well. They're perfectly placed in the mix as far as volume leveling and panning placement. And everything is punchy but not overpowering. And it just sounds crisp and great to listen to. And the rhythms and the patterns and the almost melodic nature that the drummer has in some of these fills that create a sense of like melodic movement through the drum kit. Excellent. Every single time that I heard the drummer start to go off, I just hear, a roll where there wasn't one before. I was like, we're about to get something real great. And sure enough, every time, it's just ear candy. I love it. And it was something I consistently looked forward to. Plus, just the sheer fact of like trying to imagine all of the like limb dependence and polyrhythmic ideas and how to actually play this and the speed and precision and technicality of it. The performance side of it was making my brain soar. And yeah, I just we've talked about this drummer before. I've gushed over him way too many times, but I feel like this song really put a strong spotlight on him, and I loved it, every bit of it. Fantastic. Now, the song starts off with sort of a breakdown. We return to these ideas several times. We just have a rhythmic pattern and some chords on the guitars, and the vocals are playing a melody over it. The drums are sometimes playing along with the rhythmic pattern, sometimes playing against it, creating this cool rhythmic syncopation and general rhythmic flow to the song. Uh, Y'all know how I am with like breakdown adjacent things, picking one note and making a rhythm out of it, genty stuff. This isn't really genty because we don't get syncopation within the riff itself, but it follows that same principle. Just pick a note and do something textural or rhythmic with it. I think this is interesting because it leaves a lot of room for the vocals to do what they're going to do. And the vocals are consistently interesting harmonically. This is where a lot of the energy of pulling from all these other different areas of music is utilized. It's pushed into the vocal melody and particularly the vocal harmonies. There's usually a 3 vocal stack going on with the vocals. I've kind of explained this in the past, but the cornerstone of a lot of metal is the power chord. It is technically just 2 notes. You have your root, your fifth, and your octave, which is just your root but higher pitched. To kind of put it into like simple terms, the root and fifth is extremely stable. It is the most stable interval, and the root and the octave are the same note. You don't get more stable than that. This is why the power chord works so well for distortion and amplification, because those two processes tend to amplify distortion as well. So if you can have the most stable note intervals, you're going to have the least amount of distortion or the least amount of dissonance or tone warble is kind of how I hear dissonance to be amplified. And it comes across as a very solid, powerful tone when distorted and amplified and overdriven. I don't know if that's necessarily why the first people decided to use power chords in metal when they started getting their electric guitars going, but it is the reason I think that it's most prevalently used, aside from the simplicity of it. But it also leaves a lot of open-endedness. Two notes do not constitute a strong chord. You have a dyad at that, and those two notes can be members of a plethora of keys and modes. So it really allows anything to be played on top of it. I don't know if they were playing power chords there, but they did sound like simple chords, which means you could add pretty much any note to it and it's going to work. If you have a 4 or 5 note chord though in play, it's going to create very small pockets of what you can add to it without the sounds feeling like they're clashing. And so what we've done is sort of removed the harmonic palette from the low end and pretty much made it malleable. Anything that, almost any melody played on top of this guitar line here is going to fit. And if you're going to start experimenting with using different types of chords and modes that typically aren't present in metal, this is a really great way to do it. Just kind of give yourself a fairly blank canvas to work with so that any colors or designs or whatever you're going to add to it, I feel like this art metaphor is slowly slipping. It's crumbling a bit. But whatever you add to it is going to fit. What I find most interesting, though, is that they don't stop there. They take it a step further. It makes me think either that they had a ton of practice and probably saw quite a bit of failures in their own time before, recording this full album and putting out there, or maybe this wasn't the first time that they played around with adding modes and keys like this. Because frequently, not all the time, but frequently, we also have another guitar, usually left panned, shredding, usually with a bit more of a metallic bite to it. Expanded palette, sure, definitely not something you're going to hear in heavy metal or death metal. It's definitely more of a progressive leaning with an expanded harmonic vocabulary, but it's still a very rule of cool metal sounding idea. At least it sounds a lot more metal than the vocal harmonies. This is wild. It doesn't sound off or wrong at all. There's no harmonic clashing. There's a lot of, I'm going to assume, attention to each individual note, what is being played by the guitar at any beat versus what the underlying foundation is versus what the vocals are doing in that same beat to ensure that everything works cohesively. This is written by somebody or by some band. I don't know if they have one main songwriter or if everyone works on this. Regardless, though, Between the Buried and Me has a strong, I'd say, grasp on chord theory at this point in time. I don't know where this sits against everything else. This is a bit earlier, 2015. Okay, so we're a decade old. Definitely after Colors, but before Colors 2. But after Parallax. Okay. I kind of have an idea on this. Y'all have made me listen to a lot. A lot of Between the Buried and Me. And so I kind of have a rough idea of their styles at different points in their discography. Despite having only listened to 3 full albums of theirs, we listened to Self-Title and Colors 2. And I haven't listened to any of it on my own because it's much like I said earlier, it's a band that should work for me. On paper, everything's there. It just doesn't always click with me, unfortunately. I think Colors 2 was the closest to working for me, but I don't remember what it was that kind of bounced off of me with that one, other than that it's just very overwhelming of an album. So yeah, somewhere in the middle of their output. They started in '02. This was 13 years later, which was 10 years ago. So yeah, about halfway. And they have this strong of a grasp already. This is a massive leap up from their debut, and even I'd say a massive leap up from Colors. Harmonically, this is so far beyond what I would have expected a progressive metalcore band to be writing. I think it speaks volumes about their dedication and passion for the craft of music, and their want to always push themselves. Might even be a need to consistently push themselves to be better, to be more complex, to have more depth to their music, to constantly reinvent themselves. Every album of theirs feels like it's just a hair bit different from what came before it. Some progressing in a linear fashion, sometimes going in a very different direction and including some brand new stuff. And I think it's one of the things I enjoy most about them is that there is such a variety within their work while still finding a strong element of cohesion on each individual release. And I think that's going to take me to my final point here. This song isn't really cohesive at all. It is all over the place, which it's called the Coma Machine. I mean, maybe that has something to do thematically, but it's also just very between a Buried and Me to jump around between a lot of ideas. I do like all of the callbacks, the return to motifs and ideas, constantly bringing back intro ideas. We brought back the verse. We returned to the chorus way after we went through a few ideas. So we still have, I think, an element of a chorus, but it's just not in the typical like A B fashion where we have alternating verses and choruses. So there's a progressive structure to it all. But it also consistently just felt like when a section ended, we could have gone anywhere because where we ended up didn't really have much to do with where we came from. And sometimes the ideas felt so different, disjointed, moving quickly between some of the more expansive and influenced by harmonic ideas, such as a lot of the clean vocal work in here. But anytime we bring up the harshes, the guitars tend to go pretty much straightforward progressive metal in those sections, and it feels so distant from like the intro stuff. And then we had like a semi-spacey, very expansive, like prog metal idea in the middle of the song that I felt was really cool, but also felt unique, and nothing else really tied into it. And again, maybe we hit the lyrics. I'm like, oh, this is about, three distinct sections or ideas or scenes or something like that. And it kind of makes sense to jump between them, much like a film would. But just off of a first listen, I find this way too disjointed to really get into. Anytime I start to enjoy something, we're flipping the switch and doing something totally different. And I find that I'm just rarely in the mood for that type of movement. It feels too chaotic for me. Let me hit some lyrics, see what's going on with the Coma Machine. And I'm very lost on these lyrics, almost as lost as I was at times with the music. The chorus, I actually had this wrong. It starts on the chorus. This is what we return to quite a few times. This is that rhythmic breakdown idea with the shreddy guitar off on the left and the vocals in the center. It says, you teach us what was, you teach us what was out there. Lift our limbs to focus, we soon drift through the night. I have no idea what this means, but it shows up three times. Everything else is a verse of varying length. Verse 1 says, "The getaway, we drought the cloud of life, a quick escape to velvet, start to drift in slumber, smoke fills the velvet room." This idea of drifting in slumber lines up with the chorus, which says we drift through the night. But without the word slumber there, drifting through the night could mean a sort of like sleeping but not sleeping. It could also just deal with not sleeping at all. To sort of act as a parallel but opposite of what it means to drift in slumber. But aside from the parallels there, the patterns themselves, I don't understand what any of this means. What is the velvet room? Why is there smoke in it as we drift in slumber? Verse 2 says, "No more options to cope, a glimpse of the hanging rope. Madness embrace the vault, cannot wait any longer. A string of lights blink, mesmerize my senses, a pulse that keeps me together." So he's being overwhelmed by a lot of stuff. There's lights everywhere, his senses are overwhelmed. It doesn't really talk about the other senses, but it does say that they are mesmerized. He says that he begins to feel some madness, and he feels like he has no more other options, but that a pulse keeps me together. I don't know if this is some sort of sound that he is hearing or if it is his heartbeat, a sort of grounding with reality. Verse 3 says, "Travel through a string of tears, screams crash down like waves, flushing my mind of a new world, climb the hill of the wrist and enter oblivion." Yeah, I don't know. There's definitely an overwhelming emotional sense here that goes along with his senses being overwhelmed. But what is actually happening to this person, I don't know. Verse 4 simply says, "My last exhale, knees crash down, now rewind." So he's breathing his last breath. This kind of aligns with death. We do have the concept of suicide from earlier, talking about glimpsing a hanging rope after he feels he has no options left. But he says that his knees crash down on ... We don't see what they crash down onto, and he says, "Now rewind." So if he is getting into a machine that can put him into a coma, which sounds bonkers, but that's what the title says to me, then the idea of taking your last breath, maybe your last conscious breath, and then rewinding, living in your mind at this point. That's possible, but I don't know. That seems like a wild song about someone finding a machine that can put them into a coma. And is that even supposed to be metaphorical? Is this not so much a coma machine, but a death machine where death is seen as an eternal coma? That's possible, I suppose. Between the Buried and Me, they like to operate on higher levels of language at times. But without any extra context to this, I'm a bit lost on it all. Y'all will have to let me know what's going on with it. But these are my thoughts. The Coma machine from Between the Buried and Me. Did you enjoy it? Was there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Please put any of those thoughts as well as your perspective and opinion on this down into the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for this one. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.